Hi everyone. In this video, we will be talking about overselling. So there are actually multiple meanings of the word oversell. One common meaning is to make an idea, product, opportunity, or so on seem better than it is. For example, when Donald Trump says that COVID in the US is getting better, rounding the turn is basically an expression which means things are getting better and the worst is over. Actually, what he said was totally untrue. If you look at the numbers, he said this around this time, and clearly from the numbers, the cases keep on going up and up and up. So Donald Trump is definitely overselling how the US is handling coronavirus. But we are not going to be using that meaning of overselling in this part of the lecture. Instead, we will be looking at, to motivate the topic, let's look at the context of an airline selling airline tickets. For example, imagine a Cathay Pacific flight from Singapore to Hong Kong. And let's assume there's 123 seats on the plane. So how many tickets would Cathay or should Cathay sell to maximize its profit? And I'd like to see what you guys think. Okay, so some students suggested selling less than 123 seats. And this is always a bad idea because some of the seats will definitely be empty. So that's a wasted opportunity to make more money by selling more tickets. If you sell exactly 123, then it's actually likely that some seats will be empty due to no-shows. So that, again, is not ideal, because you could have been a bit greedier and made more money by selling more tickets. Finally, if you decide to sell more than 123, or what is called overselling, you might be able to fill the plane exactly if you made the right guesses about how many people would not show up, and this allows you to really maximize your revenue by utilizing every last seat on the plane. So we'll be focusing on this particular meaning of overselling, which is to sell more of something than is available. In fact, the Cambridge Dictionary website gives this as an example. Airlines oversell on the assumption that some passengers won't turn up. And this is also known as overselling, is also referred to sometimes as overbooking. So the objective of overselling is basically to maximize revenue, because as you have more sales, you get more revenue because each sale is equal to some revenue. And this is kind of obvious, that's why I put this rolling eyes emoji there. The key issue in terms of services and why services do overselling is because service capacity is perishable. So for example, if your hotel room is empty today, you can't save up that service capacity to serve customers tomorrow. Basically, that service capacity is gone. And because customers no-show, therefore you can use overselling to attempt to utilize your service capacity fully and collect the maximum amounts of money that you can. So what are customer no-shows? Basically, when a customer made a reservation for a hotel room or a plane ticket but didn't show up and didn't cancel the reservation, that's a no-show. And examples of industries where no-shows commonly happen are transportation, such as airlines, cruise ships, trains, long-range buses, hotels, car rentals, events such as concerts, going to Disneyland, and other things like that. So why do customer no-shows occur? Actually, at this point, I think it's a good idea if we can discuss this, see what different students have to say about this. Have you ever no-showed for either a plane trip or a hotel room or something else? And why did you no-show for that? So let's have a discussion. Dum 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 dum. All right, discussion's over. Blah blah blah. Okay, and we might do that discussion part live in class. So I'm going to skip ahead to here. So let's suppose your company engages in overselling. So what happens if there are enough no-shows? In that case, everyone can be served and the customers are happy, your company is happy because it made more money from overselling, so everything is great. However, it's possible that there could be too few no-shows. That means there are more customers who want to get on the flights than there are seats on the flights available. And in that case, you have to basically bump these passengers onto a later flight. In this comic, it basically shows United Airlines throwing passengers out of the plane while the plane is flying. So obviously this is a bit of an exaggeration. United Airlines or any airlines would never do this, but the reason for this comic is because of this very famous or infamous United Express Flight 3411 incident. So what happened was Dr. David Dow was seated on his United Airlines flight. He wanted to go back home and he had to see passengers the next day. However, due to some mismanagement by the airline, they needed to find a few seats on that plane in order to reposition their staff. So this plane was flying from city A to city B, but the United Airlines needed to move some staff from city A to city B so that they could operate a later flight from city B to city C. So what happened was they bumped a few passengers who were already seated in the plane, and Dr. David Dow refused to get off. So I think it was the airline police, the airport police or somebody was sent, and then they physically assaulted him and dragged him out of the plane. He knocked his head and he was probably unconscious in this shot, but later he got up and you saw he lost some teeth, blood was spilling from his mouth, and he was obviously very upset about this. And in the end, he actually sued United Airlines. They settled out of court. Probably he made millions of dollars. And he had to sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, so nobody knows exactly what the details are. But it's a safe guess that he made a lot of money from this. Though I don't personally think I would be willing to go through this just to make the money. But the money helps a little bit, given that it already happened. So the main point is that airlines need to be very careful when they bump passengers. And also it's a very bad idea to bump passengers if they are already seated in the plane and expecting to go. Here's another example from Air Canada. So there was an article from the newspaper which claims that employees from Air Canada were trained to dupe, in other words, to trick or to lie to passengers about the passengers' risk of being bumped from oversold flights. For example, the staff were supposed to tell people that they were definitely going to get on the plane, even though the staff knew it was possible that they might not. And this was a way to increase the sales of tickets, because passengers buy only if they are sure they can get on, but actually they're not. The reality is the seat is not guaranteed. Also, when agents were trying to interact with passengers, the agents could see if the boarding pass said that they needed to go to the gates to get the actual seats, you didn't actually want to explain that to the passengers because they would get extremely upset and cause a lot of stress or tension when interacting with the agents. So although the agents knew what was going on, it was easier for them to just lie about it. And he basically, this staff person said, I train people to dupe passengers, which is obviously not something that makes you happy about your job. Okay, so what did we learn from this United Airlines and Air Canada examples? I think here are 3 key takeaways. So first, companies need to behave ethically towards their customers. In particular, they need to be honest when they communicate with their customers. Also, companies need to use the carrot rather than a stick in terms of treating their customers more gently. So for example, use incentives such as giving customers travel vouchers instead of trying to physically assault them and force them off the plane. And finally, the government sometimes needs to step in because the companies cannot always be trusted to protect the rights of consumers. So in such situations, government regulation may really be necessary and beneficial. Alright, so let's now focus on this question of how companies should take care of bumped passengers. So what is bumping? Here's a graphic that I found from the Hong Kong Consumer Council. Anyway, at the bottom left of my slide. So it actually shows some situations that occur when passengers are bumped. For those of you who are not so fluent in Chinese, the next slide actually has some written translations of the text that was in Chinese. Okay, so let me walk through this verbally. So, when passengers bought tickets on an overbooked flight, which is completely full, then they'll be bumped because they can't get on the plane. There are no seats left. So, what needs to happen first is the staff need to communicate clearly with them what's going on and explain the situation. This customer is complaining because he could not find the information that he needed from the airline's website. So the airline needs to find alternative itineraries for these bumped passengers to get them to the same destination, but just a little bit later. Then the other issue is if the passengers end up waiting in the airport for example, 4 or 6 hours, then the airline may have to arrange for them to have meal vouchers in order to buy lunch or dinner or tea or things like that. Also, if that was the last flight for the day, the airlines might even have to find a hotel or some place for them to spend the night safely. Finally, the hotel may need to give them some sort of compensation. This could be in the form of cash, although usually it's in the form of travel vouchers. So you can use those travel vouchers to redeem tickets from the same airline for future travel, or sometimes even refunds in more extreme circumstances. Alright, so now let's also discuss briefly how should a company decide the overbooking level. So there are 2 things that the company needs to consider. First, it is the gain or the profits that it makes from each, for example, reservation sold. And second, the loss. So if you have to bump a passenger, how much does that cost you? So what is interesting is the number of extra seats or extra reservations that you sell, the so-called overbooking level, affects the expected loss. So for example, if you overbook 1 passenger, the chance that you have to bump that passenger is fairly low. But if you overbook a second passenger, the chance that you need to bump the second passenger increases. So the expected loss increases as you overbook more and more passengers. The goal of the overbooking policy is to balance the gain from selling extra reservations with the expected loss from having to bump these passengers. So in this course, we're not asking you or teaching you how to calculate the optimal overbooking level, because that's not really taught. This is not really a math or stats course. But I think what we do want you to understand is how these parameters affect the optimal overbooking level. Alright, so let's do in class, discuss in class, if you change these parameters while, for example, increase the selling price while leaving the other parameters unchanged, how does that affect the overbooking level? Does it lead to an increase or a decrease? So let's discuss that in class. Discuss. Done. Okay, so what are the actual answers? So when the selling price increases, you actually want to increase the overbooking level. That means you want, and the reason for that is you get more benefits for each extra ticket that you sell. So even if you have to compensate the passenger, it can be worth it because you get an extra bonus from selling these more valuable tickets. When the compensation cost increases, obviously you overbook less because it becomes very expensive to bump passengers. And when the no-show rate increases, you want to overbook more because more customers are not going to show up. So that means you can adapt accordingly. So for example, flights from Las Vegas, where many people get drunk and sleep in and miss their flights, and the no-show rate is high, you might have higher overbooking levels there. But for flights from, say, San Francisco, where people are more serious and do work, then the no-show rate might be fairly low, so the overbooking level as well will tend to be lower. Alright, so that's the end for this lecture. For this part of the lecture, we learned about overbooking and why it's a good idea because of the no-show rate, and we also have some intuition about how the parameters of the problem affect the overbooking level, and we also discussed how to take care of passengers who are bumped so that it doesn't cause a huge PR crisis for your company. Alright, that's all. See you next time.